And now we present to you Thac0 with Advantage.
Welcome to Thac0 with Advantage. We're two friends that have been playing D&D a long time. Well, we both love lots of other RPGs. D&D collects stray fantasy elements the way English accumulates unrelated words. Me, Ange. Me play pretend. Me like shiny math rocks. Tell stories for many years around table with pizza box and chips and good friends. Spread word. RPG's good. Come play.
And on that note, the magenta box set was forged for my sister and was then passed down to me. If the box set sheds too much blood, it will begin to crave more blood and induce the dungeon master to kill even more. Only a worthy DM can resist his bloodlust and run a pure D&D session. You can find my curse-resistant articles on my website, whadoiknowjr.com, and on Gnome Stew. After we look at the games we're running in the campaign journal, we'll be talking about rating PbtA and Forged in the Dark games for their juicy morrow. Then we'll have some recommendations of D&D related content for you to check out in our downtime research segment.
Now stand by for station identification. This is WDND the Role Player. Now we're going to Mac McKinney and the Morning Game with Wolfman. With the Vancian Magic system, you prepared spells and then forgot them until you have a chance to prepare more spells.
You know, this has been foundational to D&D from the beginning, and almost immediately fans were attempting to create alternate systems.
One notable example was the spell point system. Fan publications like Alarums Excursions circulated some of these systems, and when the RPG Tunnels and Trolls came out, it relied on a spell point system.
And Gygax was totally chill about all of this and called these alternate rules beneath contempt.
But in 1996,
after TSR booted Gygax,
that's really harsh, man.
You know, what goes around comes around.
That's a good point. But in 1996, Players' Options Spells and Magic presented D&D players with the worst of both worlds. A spell point system that you used to determine what you could memorize, not what you could cast.
Boo!
In the 3.5 Unearthed Arcana sourcebook, there was another shot at spell point implementation, but with Sorcerers still relatively young, the system stepped on that class's strengths by giving Wizards similar flexibility, and that flexibility came with a wider range of spells.
Sorcerers don't deserve that flexibility, they're just magic nepo babies.
You know, Wolfman, you're just mad because I play a sorcerer in our campaign and it's constantly outblasting your wizard.
Nepo baby.
In 2014, the Dungeon Master's Guide also had a spell point system, which adds a limitation of 1 spell per day each from 6th level or higher. That said, the 5e spellcasting is way less Vancian than previous editions, with characters able to use their spell slots to cast whatever they have prepared.
So, Mac, does that mean that the system has become above contempt?
Only the public can say. So what say you, public? Is the current magic system above contempt? Let them know on the Thac0 with Advantage Discord.
Let me just finish up this campaign journal.
Alas, City of Cowls was canceled for the last session. The GM has a lot on his plate with work and family, and so while it was very disappointing that we didn't get to play, it was also understandable, and we're all friends, so we're all okay with it. We're just hoping he's doing okay. He basically had a weekend that he had to do an overnight shift at work, and then the next day his wife was out of town, so he had to be solo parent, and it was their daughter's like 13 and she has all of the activities that a 13-year-old has, so he messaged us a few hours before gaming and he's like, guys, I have nothing left in me, there's no gas in the tank. Hopefully we'll get to play this weekend though. I did get to run the old Margrave game, and in our last session the group had found Clunk, a small clockwork fellow in the employ of Zyphona Kilenvi, a merchant friend of Dahlia's. They learned that Zyphona had refused to give the warden of Castle Stephenstore a bribe, and so he had thrown her in a prison cell. Now, I may have prepped myself into a bit of a pickle with this one. Well, Zyphona getting thrown in a cell is definitely a bad thing. The warden is technically legally in charge of the castle and is a lawful employee of the city of Zobek. And while he may be taking advantage of his position and forcing bribes out of travelers on the river and such, he is still giving the city exactly what they're owed from the tolls collected on the river. So he is a legal representative of the city of Zobek. If the players had blazed in all murder hobo style, it would have been a difficult fight, but it was set up to be something they could handle if that was the way they decided to do it. But it also would have meant they'd killed a bunch of lawful guards from their home city, as well as an official, and probably made some enemies back in their hometown.
So are you saying that if there are corrupt people that get into a position of authority, it's very difficult to dislodge them if you don't want to just toss the entire system aside? Is that what you're saying?
It might be what I'm saying. Now, this may not have been the group to do something so not black and white with, for a few different reasons. First, there is no face for this group. The warlock does not have persuasion trained, even though he has a high charisma skill. The character refuses to engage with NPCs on any level that would require negotiation or diplomacy or anything like that. He's friendly. He likes to help people. He does not put himself forward at all. The ranger, who is nobility of a kind, does have persuasion trained, but the player struggles a bit with how to approach things and really isn't comfortable playing the face, though he is trying. Second, they are not the most proactive group. There's some degree of turtling, but there's also an aspect of shooting down ideas as being impossible for things that I had considered something they could actually use as a way to solve this, but I had not explicitly said that. Either way, they ended up approaching the castle and talked with a guard captain. I thought they were going to kind of do some recon to kind of find out what was going on here, but nope. They opened right with Dahlia immediately asking about Zyphona. So the captain went and got the warden, and once the warden knew that there were people willing to pay for Zyphona's release, he tripled the cost. Because he's a bastard, and something bad needs to happen to him. But, I wanted this to be a little bit of a tricky situation. Zartath and Dahlia did ask to go in and see Zyphona to make sure she was okay, and the warden allowed that. The cell she's in is pretty miserable, but she wasn't being tortured, and she wasn't being starved. So there was that part of the situation. They also happened to notice that there were some unsavory people hanging around the courtyard like they own the place. They got chatting with the captain, and they rolled well enough that I had the captain be kind of friendly, and figured the captain likes his job. He likes being stationed out here in the middle of nowhere at Castle Steffenstor. He's got some trouble at home with his wife, so he just didn't want to be back in the city. So he's fine being here. And while he may not like what the warden is doing, the warden is the person who signs his paycheck, so to speak. But he let them know that the unsavory people are bandits, that the warden kind of lets do what they will because they always give the warden a kickback on what they steal from the people they notice going up and down the river. So the players decided to come up with a plan and lure the bandits away. They very loudly said as they traveled back through the courtyard that they needed to go to their imaginary wagons to get the money. And of course, the bandits followed them. So, ambush time. And this is what I mean by I have tactical players. The fight with the bandits was a deadly fight by CR. They wiped the floor with the bandits. There were 4 thugs, 8 bandits. There was even a group of the bandits and a thug that they had not seen approaching. But other than taking a couple of hits here or there from crossbows, my players were fine. On to the next part. It was getting close to 11 at night, and I knew there wasn't going to be enough time to do anything in relation to getting Zyphona out of the castle now that they've dealt with all of the bandits. And the players definitely did not want to go in and be murder hobos. They didn't want to kill the guards or anything like that. They would have happily seen the throat slit on that warden, but the rest of them, they're like, we can't really fault them. So what I told them is it's 11 o'clock. I want you guys to come up with the plan of what you want to do, and that's where we will pick up next week. And I want you to put this plan in writing. because I know my players. If they talked about it and nobody wrote it down, in 2 weeks when we play again, nobody would remember what they had planned. They basically began discussing things, and this is where I also got a little frustrated with the players. I had one player declare with absolute authority there was no way they could sneak in. And I basically was like, I think the rogue is going to be pretty insulted at that comment, because this is the rogue's job. And 2 other players, including the one that said it wasn't possible to sneak in, have sneak as a trained skill. I'm just like, I know your number is not high, but you are trained in it, which means you're not bad in it. The other thing they did is they assumed that Zafona would be absolutely useless and they would have to carry her out. There was even talk of finding somewhere a wagon full of hay to place at the bottom of the wall so they could drop her over the wall and she could land safely. And I kind of finally had to point out to them, this is a woman who chose to travel through the old Margrave by herself with her cart of goods and her little clockwork buddy. She's not feeble. She can handle herself. Please give her a little more credit than you're giving her.
Can't get out on her own, but that doesn't mean she's incompetent.
You know, I love these folks. These are some of my favorite people in the world. I really just wish they were a wee bit more adventurous and a wee bit more proactive, because I don't want to railroad them, but they make it very, very tempting.
I'm just still trying to recover from that idea that, like a corrupt government official would attract a group of thugs to work with them. That just seems wild.
Okay, I'm going to embarrass Dahlia here because, as I said, Dahlia is nominally the face of the group. Dahlia literally said to the guard captain, "This is a nice place you have here. It would be a shame if something happened to it." And got very confused when I asked if she was trying to intimidate him.
Just because that is like the poster, phrase for every intimidation ever.
Zartath's player was like, "Hey, I've watched that mob movie."
Oh my goodness. So I have had 3 game sessions since the last time we recorded. I ran my face-to-face Curse of Strahd game, my Thursday night 2014 DnD game in Midgard, and my monthly Tales of the Valiant Thrones and Bones game. And I had a really interesting pattern develop because 2 of those game sessions were entirely without combat. The last of those was literally one long 12-round combat. And they were all really good sessions, too. So, I mean, I am not complaining one way or the other. I just found it kind of interesting that I had 2 back-to-back very role-playing and planning-heavy sessions versus this one continuous combat. In our Curse of Strahd game, the PCs had just found Esmeralda at Van Richten's tower. She'd been bitten by a werewolf, and that's our cliffhanger. And it turned out that the pack leader of the werewolves in Barovia brought a bunch of werewolves out to the tower and was threatening to come after Esmeralda. I figured my group was just going to kind of like steel themselves and like launch into a fight. They started trying to figure out if they could come up with the command words for the clay golems, which only actually work as like elevators in the tower. But if they could repurpose them, they were going to have them on their side. So I think they're digging in for a fight. Like they're trying to figure out, like, I'm going to get these clay golems to go attack. I'm going to, we're going to come at them from 2 different directions. Out of the blue, the changeling decides she is going to impersonate Esmeralda, turn herself over to the werewolf, and basically be on the inside, getting everything set up for the PCs to come and attack the den. At which point, our elf cleric, who has the fiendish trait of now being able to have people sign soul contracts, had the idea that she will have the changeling sign that contract because whoever she has a contract on, she can track. So this was a completely unintended side benefit of like her getting these weird fiend powers. And I love the fact that they came up with that as like, we'll just have you sign this contract and track you. The changeling player absolutely loves Critical Role. She gets back to the werewolf lair and she is so happy because I did the taking her away from the table and role playing just with her to set up, that she is in the werewolf den and what she sees, and finding out that the pack doesn't realize that their old pack leader isn't dead, that he's actually still alive in Castle Ravenloft. And, she starts setting up this whole idea that they're just going to stand aside while everyone gets rid of the new pack leader, while the PCs like just kind of gang up on him. She was so happy because she got to have her own moment away from the table. But I did ask her for a persuasion check at one point. She goes, I didn't bring my dice with me. So it was really interesting. We ended with her, all the PCs snuck into his part of the den and they were waiting for him. The changeling lured him into the den, and we're going to start basically with them getting a surprise round on him. I am using some stats for him that I found online, which make him a little beefier, and he's effectively a mythic monster, so he has one form, and then after he gets defeated, he transforms into something else, so that'll be interesting. I'm looking forward to that fight, though.
Very JRPG of you.
Indeed. And then in the Midgard game, we also had a very role-playing heavy session where the Empyrean kobold that the PCs met last time ended up helping them with a human priest that was framed as a spy, that they were trying to find, evidence that she was innocent, and he just kind of came in and helped out with that, but also brought his friend, who is a gigantic dragon angel thing, which is in one of the kobold press bestiaries, and I can't remember the name offhand right now, but it is basically a huge dragon angel thing. It's got like multiple wings and a big dragon head, and
I think my
scales all over the
notes
place.
simply said draconic angel.
He showed up and took the tablet that has the instructions on how to find the evil artifacts away, so nobody's going to find those artifacts, at least not in the immediate future. But also revealed to Kazina that she has an ancestor that she didn't know about, that is a fiend dragon hybrid that is associated with the cold. And the PCs also got to do a field inspection of the Children of the Twice Martyr, which are the Loki worshipping mercenaries that they had recruited. And they found some really interesting new recruits that they had picked up.
I love them a lot.
There's a lot of damaged people that are looking for a found family. I will put it that way. But then when we got on the road and they were traveling, their first encounter was a doppelganger. A doppelganger was stealing things and playing pranks on the mercenaries and has been traveling with them for months. And the mercenaries have never detected him yet. And this time he went a little bit too far and stole the paymaster's coffers. And the PCs catch him, at which point I was very surprised that Marin was the one that suggested that if they're going to explain who this doppelganger is without exposing him as being a doppelganger, why don't they say that he's Loki's son? Which was fascinating.
Ivy was horrified by.
Ivy was horrified. She tried very hard to not flat out say that he was Loki's son, but to imply all around it so that she didn't have to say that she had vouched for him directly. I really like that. That was probably one of my favorite resolutions for just rolling a doppelganger on a random encounter chart.
I loved how some of the rest of the players are like, oh, where there's one, there's more. Like, all of a sudden, it's going to be this grand conspiracy. And I'm just like, if it was a grand conspiracy, the dude wouldn't be running around just pranking this group of haphazard mercenaries. He's probably just some dude having fun.
He was very amused that he could stay hidden amongst them for multiple months and nobody picked up on him. And then the Thrones and Bones game, I think this worked really well. I really liked it. The way the adventure was set up at the end, the PCs start with this ritual that these merfolk are doing that's going to wipe out the entire coastal city where they were based out of. And there's basically three outcomes. If you don't manage to stop the ritual, then it just destroys the whole town. If you stop the ritual, but you don't stop the rod that the traitor in town has that's guiding the storm in, then about 25% of the town is still like wiped out. Or you can save everybody. And there is a set number of rounds that you have to stop the ritual and get to the rod and break it. The PCs managed to do it at the last possible chance they could have. It was great.
Yeah. It was a very interesting fight because Dawn, my paladin, went in not at full health. So she was at 18 of 25 hit points. And ended up engaging with the big bad leader of the group, the priestess.
matriarch. Yeah.
Yeah, and her spear was something else. So
Yeah.
she stabbed Dawn. Dawn went down. I believe Kingen poured a healing potion down her throat, so she got up, at which point I was able to use one of her paladin abilities to blind all of the merfolk because we decided they're related to Fae. And then the matriarch stabbed her again and she went down and was down for the rest of the fight. But blinding everyone ended up helping us get through that fight quick enough that gave us enough time to get up and try and stop the traitor from killing the Jarl.
A spear that does 2d6 additional necrotic damage is kind of rough in a 3rd level adventure.
I don't know who thought that was a good idea.
And it does more damage if you have a condition.
Yeah, it was bad. It was really bad.
I had a lot of fun running it, though. It really felt like the tension kept up and everybody kind of had the idea of what they needed to do. And it did feel like what you would see in an action movie when people are trying to race to that final scene and get to the traitor and break the rod before the horrible wave hits the town.
It was very well done. I enjoyed it quite a bit.
Welcome to the Dungeon Master's Workshop.
Game design is a wibbly-wobbly mass of different ideas that get thrown in a pot and mixed together until a game comes out. And while people tend to think of D&D and its iterations as a bit of a monolith, it has adapted different ideas over the years into its mix. And as we're saying all the time, we are polygamers around here, and we play a ton of different games. Today, we're going to look at 2 game systems, or style of game systems, that have exploded in the last decade plus. Powered by the Apocalypse and Forged in the Dark. And we're going to talk about what we can take from these 2 types of games and apply to our D&D games. We're going to podcast to find out. Now, for anyone that doesn't know, what's the quick version of what Powered by the Apocalypse and Forged in the Dark games actually are? Are they games in and of themselves?
Sort of. There are commonalities. It's not quite, say, the 5th edition SRD that you would build something on and you have a core set of assumptions, but they are very similar mechanics that get grouped together. So in like Powered by the Apocalypse, you have you're rolling 2d6 and you have 3 levels of resolution where you can have not necessarily a failure, but the worst possible result, a mixture, and then a total success. And you will have different bonuses that you can add to that. And there is a bunch of different moves. Most Powered by the Apocalypse games have playbooks, which are somewhat similar to basically character classes, but it's kind of got a bunch of stuff bundled in there. It's going to, where the dials get turned up and exactly what it does is different based on what genre that it's really emulating. And that's a big thing that both Powered by the Apocalypse and Forged in the Dark really do, is emulate certain genres.
Yeah, I think it's probably important to touch on the history here for a little bit. This all started with Apocalypse World, which is where the Powered by the Apocalypse name comes from. It was published in 2010 by Vincent and Mackay Baker, and it is just like it sounds. It's Apocalypse World. Let's go play some Mad Max. And the ideas of that game inspired a whole bunch of other people to start making games built around those same kind of mechanics. As Jared said, Powered by the Apocalypse is you roll 2d6 and you add a modifier. 6 or below is generally failure. 7, 8, or 9 is success with complications. It really varies from game to game. And then 10 or above is, succeed, you did the thing. And then the concept of the playbooks. And like Jared said, most of these games are heavily designed to emulate a very specific genre or type of game. You don't find any generic systems in these. And to a certain degree, I know some long-term D&D players struggle a little bit with the Powered by the Apocalypse games because they feel like there's limited longevity there. Like, you can't necessarily play every week for several years playing the same Powered by the Apocalypse game. But, as I regularly tell people, most of those D&D games don't last that long either. So it's like the golden standard in people's minds may be a multi-year campaign that's played every week or every other week, but it is very rare for that to actually happen. So a game that you can play a complete campaign in 8 to 10 sessions is a pretty interesting idea.
And a game that is near and dear to both Ange and I is a Powered by the Apocalypse game, and that is Monster of the Week, which we both dearly, dearly love because we were both Monster Hunter aficionados.
Now, the other game system we are talking about here, the Forged in the Dark games, which they're like an evolution of Powered by the Apocalypse games. There's a lot of similar concepts, and they come from that style of game, but they take it in some different directions. They come out of the game Blades in the Dark, which was designed by John Harper and released in 2017.
If you want to get to the closest equivalent of understanding the setting of the original Blades in the Dark, go play Dishonored, because it is very much Dishonored, which is good because I absolutely love Dishonored. But yeah, it is kind of that weird supernatural diesel punk kind of grim urban setting for it. And it is a lot about gaining territory and holding out against other gangs and watching different factions in the city rise and fall. In a way, it is almost a response to that idea that you may not play a Powered by the Apocalypse game for that long, because there are a lot more things that can advance and change in a Forged in the Dark game. It's much more procedural, and you're tracking a lot more things to see how things change over time. So I think in some ways it does have a little bit more campaign longevity than some Powered by the Apocalypse games have.
So we mentioned Monster of the Week. What are the other Powered by the Apocalypse or Forged in the Dark games that you have played and loved? We don't need to talk about the fantasy side of things. We're polygamers here. We're going to talk about the other games.
Like, honestly, I absolutely love Worldwide Wrestling. It is not just about wrestling. You are playing wrestlers, and by that I mean you are playing people that know that you are playing out a choreographed story in the ring. So you are playing the wrestler where you're arguing to have a better storyline, where you're like at the last minute you might swerve the booking and actually pin the person. Like, it is just amazing. I absolutely love it. I never thought I would find a wrestling RPG that I love that much, but it is amazing.
One of the ones that I absolutely adore, besides Monster of the Week, is Masks. Masks is the Young Justice game. You are playing teen superheroes coming of age, dealing with figuring out who you are and what your place in this world is, all tied up with superhero shenanigans. I absolutely love that game. That one, Monster of the Week, and Uncharted Worlds, which is a space opera one, were my convention go-to games for the longest time.
I haven't gotten to play it as much, but I also really like the Sprawl, which is a nice cyberpunk, very Gibson-esque cyberpunk. It is very much rooted in that original kind of grittiness, not as much like newer wave cyberpunk, but about pulling heists and how your person hiring you is probably going to screw you over. And it is, unlike a lot of cyberpunk games, it is not over-designed to the point that you want to cry because you really like the setting.
Another cyberpunk game that's Powered by the Apocalypse that I adore is Headspace. One of the things to understand with these types of games is that they are very tailored to a specific experience. Headspace is a cyberpunk game where you are playing 5 members of a group that has decided to move against the corporations, and you've neurally linked all of your heads. So that's why it's Headspace. You are all connected via this neural space, and that brings with it the fact that you are a very tight team working together, very good at what you do, but you also have the neural feedback that happens when bad things happen to each of you. And the game is supposed to start with your sixth member having recently died. Bombshell, she was the best of us.
I was lucky enough I actually did get to play a session of that too. I didn't get to play a long-term game, but I had a lot of fun in that one session.
Yeah, I ran a session of it that went pretty well, even though I barely understood what I was running. And I got to play with the creator of the game at the Toronto convention. I also got to play with the creator at Breakout Con.
That is very cool.
Yeah, and there's like Bite Marks. I've played Bite Marks. That's the one where you get to be a werewolf.
I want to get that to the table sometime.
Yeah, I got to actually play that one run by the creator on She's a Super Geek. And I bought it and played it with my group. Monster Hearts deserves a mention. Monster Hearts is you're playing teenage monsters, dealing with the fact that you're both teenagers in high school and the fact that you are monsters. Probably queer monsters, but it's very, very good game. So many good Powered by the Apocalypse games.
Also, if you're going to look up Ange playing in that Bite Marks game, you should also look up Ange running Masks, because that was an epic run of game going on there when she ran that for She's a Super Geek.
Yeah, I'm still proud of that
one of my all-time favorite AP things that I've ever listened to.
Since fantasy games are our bread and butter around here, what are some fantasy games that come out of these style games?
One of the big ones is going to be Dungeon World, because that was probably, I think that's like a first wave adaptation of Apocalypse World. Like that was one of the very first that took the concepts in Apocalypse World and applied them to something else. And that something else was creating a game that was meant to emulate not just the fantasy genre, but literally how first edition D&D played. Yep.
I have to confess, I haven't played a lot of these high fantasy games, traditional D&D-esque games, because I get into a lot of them and I'm like, why am I not playing D&D? I appreciate what they are. I appreciate what they're doing. And I don't want to yuck anyone's yum with these, but some of them I don't have a whole lot of experience with, because I've played Dungeon World. I've had Chris, our beloved editor, run Dungeon World for me, and I've had fun, but it's still always one of those, I'm never going to run it. Anyway, one of the other kind of high fantasy PbtA games, but is a more modern version, is Avatar Legends, the one that's completely based on the Avatar animated series. That one just came out like last year, or?
And then you have Root, which is based on the board game where you are playing animals, little cute animals in a fantasy setting, but also your little cute animals that use swords and arrows on each other. So that's another game that is in the fantasy genre that is a PbtA game. Speaking of getting to play a game with one of the creators, I actually had one of the people that made The Sword, the Crown, and the Unspeakable Power, which is very much like a Game of Thrones type fantasy PbtA game, run a session of that for me here at the game store in Bloomington, Illinois. That was kind of neat.
Cool. Another one I actually own but have not yet played is Apillion, where you play dragons, little baby dragons.
The Watch is a really, really interesting one. I feel like that one kind of like didn't get the spotlight it deserved. It is a setting where there is a creeping corruption that is more likely to strike the men of a society. So everything is very much based on the women trying to protect the society and root out the causes of this corruption. Women aren't immune to it, but they are much more resistant to it than the men. One of the very good, solid points that they make in that is that if you are a woman, you are resistant to it. It does not matter whether you may not have been considered a woman when you were born. So I really like that one, but it is a very neat, evocative fantasy RPG.
Yeah. Another one that leans into that high fantasy is Fellowship, which is literally like, hey, let's do Tolkien with Powered by the Apocalypse. What about some of the Forged in the Dark games?
I
want to take a moment and notice that it is very easy to say PbtA when talking about Powered by the Apocalypse, But Forged in the Dark, I have to say, Forged in the Dark, I can't say FITD. It just doesn't
FITD.
roll off the tongue.
I know. I see those letters and immediately say Forged in the Dark. I don't even think to do the letters, so I understand. The Forged in the Dark games, obviously, Blades in the Dark is very fantasy oriented, even though it's a little bit more industrial diesel punk. It is definitely still a fantasy setting. You're still dealing with ghosts and etheric fields and supernatural powers, and there's vampires and demons, and it is definitely a fantasy setting. Band of Blades, I really, really want to get to the table. It is very much a sort of Black Company style mercenary game where you are playing out this campaign trying to survive up to the winter, and you're playing different. It's very troop style. Like sometimes you will be playing like the veterans of the mercenary company, and then sometimes you'll be playing like the newbies trying to survive long enough to actually make a name for yourself in the company.
I've always thought Band of Blades was kind of also inspired by the World War II series Band of Brothers.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of that because the whole idea is that you are getting, that's actually part of what's neat. Like if you are playing the rookie that's on a mission, are the veterans going to keep this person alive? How are they going to feel if that rookie is the one that ends up dying on this mission? It's also part of why it's troop style is so that there also isn't that idea that, oh, my character died. It's like, well, one of my characters that I play died. So
Right.
it's, it's a really interesting dynamic, but it also feels like you need to really set some time aside to do it the right way, though.
Now, my experience with Forged in the Dark is limited. I've played Blades in the Dark once, and I've played Scum and Villainy, which is their science fiction Forged in the Dark game. But what are some other fantasy Forged in the Dark games?
Court of Blades is neat. It is fantasy, but it is more swashbuckly, like court intrigue type fantasy, which I love. Like I said, I loved my 7th game, so I'm definitely going to be all in on that type of thing. In that case, like a lot of your procedures are going to be like setting up, someone to take a political fall or something like that. There's one called Brinkwood Blood of Tyrants, which I have definitely not got to the table, but it is largely about people trying to resist vampires that just own this entire kingdom and what it takes to kind of like retake the kingdom from them. And there's another one called Mountain Home, which is basically just you are a bunch of dwarves and this is making your city larger and trying not to delve too deep and end up, awakening something from deep, deep down that may or may not have wings made out of fire.
You dug too deep. And what about Ironsworn? What's that?
Ironsworn is really neat because it is kind of a hybrid offshoot of both of these games. You can play it as a traditional RPG, but it is very much geared towards playing solo, and everything is based around clocks. Everything you're setting up like this. I want to complete a major quest, so that's going to be this clock, but I need to get from here to here, and it will tell you certain things like you need to make sure that you accomplish this many quests before you can resolve this main storyline. And there are a bunch of different tables that you can roll on that help you flesh out the story. It's really fascinating, but we'll talk about it a little bit more later on in this discussion.
One of the things we talked about when we talked about how these games work is that most of them use playbooks for character creation. And that's true of both Powered by the Apocalypse games and for Forged in the Dark games. What can we take from those and apply to D&D?
Almost every Powered by the Apocalypse or Forged in the Dark game I have seen have little things on the character sheets that in one way or another connect you to other players. Sometimes they suggest NPCs that you have as contacts. So you'll pick one of these three as your contact and one of these three as somebody that doesn't like you. And so you're fleshing out backstory and you are connecting characters to each other.
I want to take a moment and point out, like what I said in the very beginning here, that even D&D has borrowed stuff from other games. When you look at 5th edition and you look at ideals, bonds, flaws, those all came out of Powered by the Apocalypse. They weren't implemented particularly well.
No.
But those concepts came out of Powered by the Apocalypse. So it will be very easy to take some of these ideas and make them work a little stronger in D&D, even if it's just to basically get a feel for who the characters are at the start of the campaign and to build connections between those characters.
It would be extremely easy to take the connections that are on the Dungeon World sheets. So it's like, you as the barbarian, who in the party do you think needs protection? Like, you can take those straight off of the character sheets in Dungeon World and just use them in a D&D game.
I absolutely fell in love with that aspect of Powered by the Apocalypse when I started playing. And it's you literally just go around the table and each playbook has some questions and you get to tie that question to another character. And it immediately creates a dynamic at the table for the players to bounce off of as they start role-playing. It's really a good kickstart to making the players feel like their characters matter in this world.
Yeah, it's something I actually started doing instead of doing the traits, bonds, flaws. I started writing like campaign-specific, more like connection type questions based on that type of playbook question to ask at the beginning of a campaign once somebody has made their characters, to tie them to each other in the setting a little bit more instead of just using what's in the 2014 backgrounds.
Yep. I've actually been using from A Life Well Lived some of the ideas in there, and one of them that I like is the camp bonds, which basically I'm still finessing it to make it work for the group because it's not particularly well described, but the idea is brilliant. Basically, two characters form a bond and they can help each other in combat or in a scene or whatever, and it's a really cool idea.
Yeah, I definitely like that. I think what it needs is maybe a little bit more leading question, like, who do you want to form a bond with? How did this bond form?
Yeah.
Based on this leading question.
And you don't necessarily have to, we're not saying you need to go out and write a bunch of questions for every D&D class or anything like that, but you can very easily take some of these ideas and borrow them from other games and just create your own list for the players to pull off of, or have them come up with stuff on the fly. It's just sometimes the inspiration that comes from having a question in front of you is a little more fun than just putting a person on the spot who doesn't I can't think of anything. I guess we met in a bar.
Yeah. Well, and that's what's nice too, is that a lot of them have more than one question. Or it's one of those things where you're like, someone is connected to me. Who is it? That way, it's not just putting one person on the spot, answer this one thing. It is, which one of these feels comfortable for you to connect with?
And that's important to point out, is that most of the Powered by the Apocalypse games I have played state up front that both players need to agree to this.
Yeah.
I have actually, at con games, nixed connections because it was actually the Headspace game that I played at Breakout Con, and one of the other players suggested something. I'm like, no, that's a little SAE there. So no, we're not going to have that connection, and just killed it right on the spot. So it's like, this is not forcing another player to do something they don't want to do. It's the two players agreeing that this is what happened. In fact, many of them are written. The player who poses the question can choose who they want to pose the question to, but the other person is the one that explains how it went down.
Yeah.
So it's basically collaboration between the two players. So you mentioned clocks earlier. So what about clocks and fronts? What are they, and how can we use them to track goals that aren't immediate?
So the neat thing is, Forged in the Dark really made clocks explode, but they are a thing that's been in a lot of RPGs in some form or another. Basically, it is saying that there are 8 parts to this pie, or there are 8 checkboxes here, and every time a specific thing happens, you check off another one, and then when it reaches the end, this other thing happens. And maybe that other thing is you complete a goal, or maybe that other thing is an invasion happens from another country. That's basically what the clocks are doing. In Dungeon World specifically, they use fronts, which is you come up with a few different threats that could be sweeping into your fantasy setting that are going to go from a tomorrow problem to a now problem. And
I love
basically,
now problems.
exactly. You'll have like 4 steps to a front, for example. If something happens, that first omen happens and it kind of warns people, yes, the front is advancing, which is another interesting part of it, is to make sure that you let someone know almost on a meta level, even if their characters don't know, like, yes, this was a momentous thing. This omen happened, and you now know that this thing is now one step closer to happening. And it is a neat way of having more than one threat in the campaign and not knowing which one is going to be the next one to present itself.
Do the players get to watch you filling in that pie piece on the square?
Almost all the time you're going to, like, especially like in Forged in the Dark games, like the players are using clocks themselves to see if they resolve things. For example, like if you decide to fight a bunch of guards, that's going to be a clock to see how well you can dispatch these guards. It's not that they have hit points and armor class or anything like that. It's a clock that you are coming up with different skills to, advance that clock. And it might be like sneaking poison into their food, or it might just be straight up stabbing them in the face. But that's going to be something they see in front of them. The only things that I think kind of get hidden a little bit more are in Blades in the Dark. You pick a certain number of factions in the city, and it will tell you what that faction's next goal is. Those all will tick forward, and the players don't necessarily know how far those are going until they actually trigger, because the city is a big city and lots of stuff happens.
I do think these are a fantastic way to add that level of there is more going on in the world than what is in front of your PCs. I've talked to plenty of GMs in the past who've been like, I don't know what to do. My players are ignoring the big plot hook. They're not going out there and doing the thing they need to do to save the world and stop the thing from happening. That can happen in a lot of sandbox games. Sometimes it happens because the players don't see the path as clearly as the GM thinks they've presented the path. But if the players know there's these clocks that are counting down and something is coming, they start being a little more interested in maybe doing the things that will better prepare them for when that clock triggers.
Yeah, and I love that as a dynamic thing, because you can do something like saying all of a sudden this other person is now the Lord Mayor of the city. How did that happen? This is all the stuff that led up to it, because these factions are maneuvering in the background.
There's good and bad things. I recommend people be very deliberate about using these. Be very purposeful when you use them, because you want to make sure that your players are on board for the type of game you're running. If you've decided you want to run a game that has a lot of political intrigue that's going down, and if things aren't taken care of, it's going to lead to major things happening in the city, but your players just want to play a bunch of drunk hillbillies that get drunk and rowdy in the tavern and then maybe go out in the woods and find a dungeon to crawl around in, you're going to have some problems when that clock goes done and big stuff starts happening and your players are like, this isn't the game I really wanted to play. So you got to make sure that your players are at least on board for that type of stuff happening in the game. But they're a fantastic way to keep track of things.
They are. It's interesting, too, whether those things that are emerging are going to be background material that they can or maybe won't engage with, or if that is going to be the major campaign. Because Headspace, for example, in long-term play, they will do a thing like where 2 corporations advance their agenda at the same time. You can only do a mission against one of them to keep it from advancing. So somebody's agenda is going to keep advancing. So you're going to have to juggle this back and forth, trying to stop multiple agendas, and you can't stop both of them at the same time. So you have to manage that going back and forth.
Now, Blades in the Dark does some interesting things with gear. How does that work, and is it something we can adapt to D&D style games?
I have always had those moments where it was like, I really should have bought this particular thing. And I think a big moment in D&D where this comes up a lot is spell components. And I actually like the concept of spell components, but it's also sometimes a pain to keep track of spell components. So, as an example, in Blades in the Dark, you actually have a certain number of slots. You don't fill those slots before you go on a mission. You just know, like, you have 5 slots. And when you need something, you say, oh, this slot is where I carried this. And then you have that piece of gear. What I kind of like about that is you can do something like that with, for example, I've actually done this in my games already, where I'll be like, if you have 25 gold pieces, you can say that you bought that material component. I don't care about you going out. The point is that it costs money. I trust that you would have gone out and gotten that thing.
Do you know how many times I've been in a game and all the characters have gotten to the place they're going, and all of a sudden everyone's like, did you buy rope? I don't have rope on my equipment list. Did anybody buy rope? Do we have any rope? You have rope. You're damn adventurers. You wouldn't have left the city.
The funny thing is like adventurers packs usually have just a ton of crap in them anyway. But where I also think this would be a neat mechanic is if you tell people like you have so many consumables, like scrolls or potions or whatever. I don't care what they are. I'll just tell you what the rarity is. And when you need one, you can say you have it and you used it. And once you go through like 4 of them, you don't have any more consumables.
So what do you say to the old school grognard player who's looking at you cross-eyed going, players are just going to abuse that? Because know they're out there.
Yes, but you can't abuse something that y'all agree to. And there are built-in limits. It's not just saying like you can just make up that I have a million potions. You would set this idea like, like in Blades in the Dark where you're saying, no, you've got like 4 slots for your expendable, items. So whatever those are, once you decide you use one of them, it's gone.
Yep.
It's a lot of flexibility, but it is a limited resource.
And it is one of those things, this type of concept is actually in a lot of games that try and basically make running heists and that type of thing a little easier to actually do because players are not and cannot be omniscient to know everything they're going to need. And if you try and play it that way, you're going to spend 3/4 of your session with your players planning only to have everything go out the window the moment they engage with whatever the thing is. So let's have some space where the players can say, I'm prepared. I had this thing. I just didn't know I needed this thing until me, the player, got to this moment in the scene. My character would have thought of this. It's another aspect of the respecting the competency of the characters. It's
not just in Blades in the Dark. That's when I mentioned the sprawl. One of the things you can do before you go on a mission is you can send people out to provision the thing. So somebody might have a certain amount of intel. Somebody might have a certain amount of gear. You spend that gear to say, I brought a submachine gun. I thought things might get bad. And they went out and rolled and they said, I got 3 gear. And then you define it as you're going through the mission.
Another Blades in the Dark mechanic that is related to this is the one that lets the players have a flashback that helps them in the current scene. It's very, very leverage. How can this work in D&D?
So in Blades in the Dark, what you're doing is you're saying, I want to set up a flashback. You explain what you wanted to have done. I went out last night and I set this thing behind the coat rack over there. So this piece of equipment is going to be over there when I go there because I've gone through all my gear slots. And then you roll to see like how it went when you did that last night. You're not going to fail at it, but it might cost you more stress than you wanted it to. You might roll really well and it didn't cost you any stress. You just did it and it went really well. So that's a thing where, you can fill in the details of that story from the previous night, but there is a chance that it costs you some current resource.
It's things like you get to a section and there's a door that has a key and you can do a flashback to say, I went to the bar that one of the guards hangs out, got him drunk and rowdy, and I ended up stealing his key off of him. You can set these things up. I went there yesterday and put this in place so I'd have it when we got to this point.
And it's a neat way to do that whole, like you said, in Leverage, where it looks like, oh, we've come to a dead stop. The plan isn't going to work. Oh, wait, no, I already accounted for this. We're good.
I took care of this. I will say this type of thing requires a level of proactive creativity
Mhm.
from the players that in my campaign journal, I think like my current group would struggle with. So it is the type of thing you have to do at a level your group is going to be comfortable with it. Because a
Yeah.
lot of improv can throw some people off or make them shut down.
And you know what you could spend to emulate building up that stress doing flashbacks. You could have people spend their hit dice if they don't roll well enough to set up that flashback scene.
Oh, yeah. That would be interesting. So Band of Blades does something interesting with NPCs. Can you talk about what those kind of cool things are?
Man, it is such a neat game, but wow, it's so in depth. One of the things that happens is you are playing an officer of the company in addition to like the veteran or the newbie that got recruited. Those veteran officers go out and get into fights. You're not worried about them dying or performing missions. There is a phase of the game where they're making decisions. Like one of you gets to decide that you need this mission for this reason. Somebody else decides, and we're going to do this mission for this. Someone else decides we're going to spend these resources for this. And basically, it is a whole section of play where you're playing these NPCs that are guiding what your PCs are going to be doing. It's kind of a neat thing where it's like you're playing these meta NPCs that are actually in charge of everything.
It's an interesting way to get the feeling across that you are part of a larger company and not just a group of individual PCs.
Yeah. The other thing is you pick a divine patron, which is like a human being that has been invested with the power of the gods, that is kind of like your mascot, your banner, the person that is driving you forward. And that gives you a certain benefit or bonus to some of the things that you can do as a mercenary company. So like if you have a person that is invested with defensive powers, you may not be as aggressive. But then if you have another person that inspires, fervent loyalty, you may be the kind that just goes out and takes things on head on. And I think that's kind of an interesting idea that not just patrons have already been kind of introduced in D&D, but I like that idea of because your patron is good at X, you get this mechanical benefit that just kind of like rides on top of your characters.
Yeah, that's a pretty cool idea. Some Powered by the Apocalypse games and Forge in the Dark games have opening moves and end of session moves. What are those and how can they be adapted to D&D?
So a lot of times there will be a playbook where it's like, for example, I'm trying to think, the one that is basically Castiel in Monster of the Week. You're playing like a divine agent, and the beginning of the session, you roll to see if you got some sort of divine guidance as to what you're doing next. So you're not just going on a mission with your friends. You are now told, no, this is important, and this is an extra thing you have to do on top of the regular mission. And that's something you roll at the beginning of the session.
I believe the Chosen also has something similar where basically they get to roll and there's potentially omens of the impending thing they were chosen to deal with.
Yeah, and I like that idea because you can really tie that into a character's backstory to kind of propel them forward. Like, we're going to do this at the beginning of the session and see if the things that are supposed to be important to your character and their backstory are going to come up now. It is built into the game. We do this at the beginning of the game. And then there's sometimes some games where at the end of the game, you have to like justify what you did to somebody. Or, for example, in the Sprawl, you're rolling to see if you get paid and don't just get shot in an alleyway by somebody that told you that they were going to pay you something.
We spent a whole episode talking about setting stuff up so we didn't have to use random charts. But we still love charts. So let's talk about Ironsworn and the Oracles. What are those?
Oh my gosh. Okay, so because Ironsworn is very set up for solo play, there are tables and tables and tables in this game of just random things. Like, do you want your next mission to have a haunted theme? If you do, roll on this table to see some of the things that come up to reinforce this haunted theme. Do you want to know what type of monster might show up in a cavern? It is I know that sounds like a random encounter, but it's different than that because there's just all these weird like ambiance things that go along with it too. This is more like saying like there's phosphorescent slugs that light up the cave. And, that's it. Sometimes it is like a plot detail that can add details to what you are doing. Sometimes it is like just that secondary information that is adding stuff to it. And a lot of it is because when you're playing that game solo, it's a way to surprise yourself with the elements of the game. You're not just saying, I am going to go kill a vampire. There was a vampire. I rolled really well. I killed it. Because you're rolling on these oracle tables, it's also complicating that situation.
It is a very cool idea. And while I am a firm believer in do your prep, having those tables is great when you're doing the prep and you need some inspiration.
And I think we may have mentioned this before on here, but one of the other great things about charts is if you roll on a chart and you really don't want to do something, you will now know I do not want to do that. It actually snaps your brain into thinking, no, I don't want to do that. Why would I do that? And it helps you start narrow down what you actually do want to do.
Yeah.
When you think that you don't have an idea about it.
Wrapping stuff up, are there any other aspects of your favorite PbtA or Forge in the Dark games that you would think about adding to your game?
I love the Devil's Bargain from Blades in the Dark. It is basically when somebody's about to do something momentous, you can have them take a devil's bargain, and that means something ominous, bad, that they will have to deal with is going to happen, but you get to roll an extra die, so you're much more likely to succeed at what you're doing. And for D&D, I don't know that I would do it so much that way. I would definitely offer that as a, wow, you really blew that roll and you don't have any inspiration. Would you like to re-roll if you know that X is going to happen if you do a reroll?
It is a very cool way to offer that player engagement with the story and what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
I will say that one of my absolute favorite things to come out of Powered by the Apocalypse is not so much a mechanic, but a philosophy. Be a fan of the characters. Especially in D&D spheres, there's been a lot of talk about adversarial GMs. You'll hear the stories of GMs that are doing things specifically to screw their players over, players who are trying to hide what their plan is so the GM can't screw them over when they engage with the thing. Right up front, 15 years ago when Apocalypse World came out, right there in the text was be a fan of the characters. Be just as excited as the players when the characters get to do cool things.
Mm-hmm.
This doesn't mean you make it easy on them. It just means be as excited as they are for the characters to do this stuff and have cool stories.
And it means when they do come up with one of those wild ass plans and it sounds cool, you don't say, technically the rules say you can't do that unless you have this feat here and also have spent 5 years justifying it before you ever had a chance to do it. No. That sounds really cool in this moment. These are your chances. This is your odds to do it. I hope you roll well.
Yeah.
That's being a fan of the characters.
Yeah. Be a fan of the characters. It's a mantra, man. Another thing I'll point out is also a little bit philosophy-esque, probably a little more mechanic, but play to find out. Sometimes this can be a little harder in a little more traditional game like D&D, where you have more structured plots and you're not doing things as completely on an improv level. But at the same time, you should know to set up your games in such a way is that there is room for the players to surprise you, for the players to do something cool and take the game in a direction you didn't expect. Play to find out.
Yeah, and a lot of that is just don't be resistant when you really thought something was going to go one direction and it doesn't.
Yeah.
Take a breath, roll with it, enjoy the randomness that has just made your life more interesting.
Yeah, but I will say to that, the players actually have to do things.
They have to play.
Now let's join Ange and Jared for some downtime research, where they do the work so we don't have to.
Every episode, we're going to look for something related to D&D that we want to pass along to the listeners. It might be products, websites, videos, or podcasts, but it will always be something that we think will enhance your D&D experience. But first, our Eldritch Invocation. We have a Patreon now, so if you would like to help us do this show and provide additional content for you, we would love it if you decided to join. We've got our own Discord, and we're releasing supplementary material left and right about different things. We have alternate spell books. We have magic items. We have companion NPCs from our Heroes of Havel's Way game. We have stuff we want to give you. All you have to do is be our patron. And to be our patron, just go to www.patreon.com/THAC0WA.
I am pretty sure I've mentioned this before, but over the last year, I've gotten back into reading fiction after a decade of falling away from it. It's amazing what happens when you finally give up trying to do things the way you always used to do them and adapt to your current needs instead. Once I figured out I could read digital books on my iPad, I've been absolutely devouring a ton of books. Now, bringing this back around to D&D and related things, while I do have Dungeon Crawler Carl on my TBR list, I haven't read that one yet. Oddly, the library only has digital copies in French. No, I don't get it either. But let me recommend the other series I think you'll love. Travis Baldree has a delightful series that starts with Legends and Lattes. The book follows Viv, an orc fighter who decides to retire, hang up her sword, and open up a coffee shop. The story he tells is lovely and cozy, and it still gives you the sense that this is all happening in a world of magic and adventure. He followed that one up with a prequel, Bookshops and Bone Dust, and there is a third book due out later this year called Brigands and Bread Knives. I highly recommend these books. They also make me want baked goods almost as much as the Great British Bake Off.
What I love, too, is I've read both of those books. I'm looking forward to the third one. It really reminded me of like moments like even like in the D&D movie, like when she goes to see Marleman. Like those are those moments where it's like it still feels like it's in a D&D style world. It's just you're focusing a little bit more on the what if I didn't go into a dungeon?
Yeah. It's like you've got this hero who's done a whole bunch of stuff, and she's decided, I'm done. I'm going to do this other thing now.
I have to do this follow-up because the day that our last episode dropped, when we were talking about how no one knows what Campaign 4 is going to be for Critical Role, they announced what Campaign 4 for Critical Role was going to be. So, it's actually going to be pretty ambitious. Brennan is going to be running a West Marches troop-style game. They're going to have 13 players, not all of whom will be at the table every session, because that's the whole point of the West Marches thing. Like, there will be certain people that are together in one group, and then they might swap out one person for another person, or it might be a whole different crew next week. So that's going to be really interesting to see how that story, because there's no way Brennan is not going to make this an epic story. This isn't going to just be random dungeon crawling with no connection to each other. So I am fascinated to see how you weave 13 people in and out of the same narrative, doing their own aspect of it.
Yeah, it's a very cool idea.
We are going to be linking to the announcement video in the show notes so that you can watch it, because it's also extremely amusing to watch Brennan interact with all of the Critical Role people in their announcement video. I also love, like, he's talking about how they would decide that it'd be really neat if there were a subclass that did this. And now that they have Jeremy Crawford and Chris Perkins working at Darrington Press, they will literally do something like, oh, here, have a subclass.
Here, I have a leftover subclass for you. We are happily part of the Polygamers Podcast Network, helping you run and play your best games. We think you'll enjoy another Polygamers podcast like
Pandas Talking Games, queer gamers talking about tabletop role-playing games and making outtakes. Join Pandas, Phil, and Senda every other Wednesday, answering listener questions about playing, running, and designing TTRPGs. It's like Car Talk, but for your games.
We have used up all of our resources, so I think it's time for a long rest. I hope this adventure was rewarding for you, and we hope you go exploring with us when we start our next adventure.